Water, earth, fire, air. Long ago, I didn't know anything about the last airbender. Then, everything changed when my best friend said, let's do a podcast. We could call it Avatar State Radio. 6,953 days had passed before I discovered Avatar, not the blue cats, but a 19-year-old cartoon. Like Aang, I have a lot to learn, but I believe I'll love Avatar The Last Airbender. Welcome to Avatar State Radio, the only show on the internet that's hosted by me, Kevin Gallagher, someone who has only watched now 8 episodes of Avatar The Last Airbender, and it's co-hosted by
Mike D'Angelo. That's me. I've watched all of Avatar.
All of Avatar. The only thing that you may have not taken in is what, some of like the comic books and stuff.
Yeah, and I mean, I think the problem is like it's hard to figure out which ones I have and which ones I don't. Like when you're looking at TV, like, hey, there's 3 seasons. I've watched all 3 seasons. It's harder to get your hands on like comics and make sure that you have everything the right way.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes when I run into that issue with other things that I collect, I just end up owning multiple things of an issue or a movie or a book. Like there's certainly books in my house that I have multiple copies of because I'm like, oh, I forgot if I have this one or not. Let me just buy it.
Right.
But so this week we're going to be a little bit different. We are doing both episodes 7 and 8 from the first season of Avatar The Last Airbender, which is Winter Solstice Part 1, The Spirit World, and Winter Solstice Part 2, Avatar Roku. This will be one singular episode as well. It felt like it made a whole lot of sense to kind of group these two together, which was really nice from like a personal standpoint of watching this show, because I don't watch them until the morning or afternoon before we record, because I want to have it super fresh in my mind. So like I've gone weeks without watching Avatar, so it feels really good to kind of get back in the saddle and hopefully be doing these on a somewhat regular basis again.
Right.
So we'll kick things off with the Part 1, The Spirit World of Winter Solstice. And I one of the first things I noticed in this is, and I don't know if this is the opening shot, I think it is how does Appa fly? Like, I know that his tail wags basically, but like if you really think, and I know this is like I'm thinking way too into the science of flying right now for a kids animation show about bending superpowers. But like if you look at like even Momo, right? Like if you look at Momo and how he flies, like logistically it all makes sense. Like he's got like little wing flaps that open up when he wants to fly. And like if you look at the birds in the show, they operate like real birds. Like everything operates outside of these flying bison, how flying things should fly. And now again, I get it. Bison don't fly.
But sky bison do.
But sky bison do. And it's really just like it's funny how, to me it's funny at least. Like, oh, he literally just wags his tail and he goes. Like there's right. It feels so unbalanced.
It's the power of farts, Kev. That's why he flaps his tail. So basically what you're saying is you want an origin story based on how sky bison get up in the air like that, as heavy and cumbersome as they look.
And it's funny because like we've said on this show about how filler episodes, and just before we hit record, we talked about filler episodes and how I feel, and they're very hit or miss for me, right? Sometimes they are great because they're giving me information I need and want, which is not necessarily information anyone else wants. So to use Avatar as an example, like one of the last filler episodes we had was the one with his friend who's still alive and like 100 and some years old, 110 years old or whatever. And like, that was a not as much as a filler episode as some other ones. There were just things that I feel like they should have hit in that one that would have made me appreciate the episode a lot more. You give me a filler episode about like sky bison and like how the science works there, I'm in. I'm like, I'm sold on that episode, and I will spend 22 minutes watching it about learning how they fly.
Well, I mean, they kind of give you a little bit of a hint as to the idea that, like, the Sky Bison are to Avatar Aang what the dragon was to Avatar Roku in this episode. In
Yeah.
that, like, the dragon is, is something that, you know, would speak to a firebender or something like that. So if we can extrapolate from there, are there similar things for earthbenders and waterbenders and things like that? Like, did Avatar Kyoshi, did she have something as well that we just didn't really kind of lean into too much? Or is it even related necessarily to the Avatar, or is it something else where it's just, hey, in this neck of the woods, this is, the animals that kind of speak to this tribe or kingdom or nation or anything like that?
Yeah, and I don't know. I have a note somewhere, and I can't see it because there's so many notes here. But there is somewhere where, like, he says to the dragon, like, "Oh, you're Roku's spirit guide, or you are to Roku as Appa is to me."
Right.
So I wonder if that's now, and we've kind of, like, I think I asked in a previous episode, like, I wonder if animals can fucking bend, right? And like, we had that joke with Momo in an episode recently where the people thought he was the earthbender,
Right.
which was really funny. And I wonder if, I guess, like, maybe it's not necessarily bending, right? Like how Appa's flying, but it is like a similar principle to how, like, because realistically, a little boy named Aang can't fly either, but he can because he has airbending abilities.
Right. So is there some kind of like manipulation powers that these animals have?
Right. And like, listen, guys, I know that there are other Avatar, The Last Airbender podcasts out there, but none of them are going to give you 5 to 8 minutes on it, on why can Appa fly.
Right. At the start of which was he has the power to fly by the power of his farts.
Yes. Like, none of them. You show me one other Avatar podcast that is going into it, and I'll eat bison. I'll go find bison meat and eat it.
Some bison jerky.
Yeah. But anyway. So, and realistically, what the opening of this episode is kind of setting up the crux of this episode, which is the spirit world, which is actually kind of the crux of both episodes, but very much this part 1 episode here, which is them landing in that, like, scar of land that was burned by the Fire Nation, which was very much like an appropriate description that they gave it. It very much looked like, oh, green, burnt green. It very much looked like the land was scarred.
Yeah, and it very much felt like there was no reason for it that we could determine in this episode. Like, it was just people who were being mean to nature for the sake of being mean.
Yes, absolutely. That's and you see Aang's reaction to that, which kind of plays up on, like, a previous episode, I believe the Kyoshi episode, where he realizes, like, his actions or lack thereof, like, have repercussions. And not that, like, I mean, Sokka and Katara are really good about, like, saying, Aang, it's not your fault, even though he puts the blame on his shoulders.
Right. The lack of it is his fault because he hasn't been there for 100 years.
Right.
But it's not, by choice that he did anything wrong. So
yeah. And so you it's a very quick scene that I think is very powerful in just kind of showing off Aang's character. And then it sets off, like, what we're going to see going forward in this episode, which is not immediately the return of Zuko and Iroh, who we have only seen, like, for little bits and pieces over the last, like, episode or two. And my favorite part of this entire episode, as good as the episode is every scene with Uncle in it.
Oh yeah, Uncle Iroh steals the show in this episode, because I think up until this point we really don't see him flexing his muscles that much. You know, like we
Right.
see a little bit where he's kind of demonstrating certain things or like explaining things to Zuko in previous episodes, where we know like, all right, this guy definitely has something going on. But to see him in his underpants, like knocking like boulders out of the sky with chains and stuff.
Yeah, yeah. And you're jumping so far ahead when it comes to Uncle. Like, I've really liked, like, he is a hard character to hate, who, even though this episode, and maybe the combination of both these episodes, he's like kind of solidified himself as like, oh, he's definitely a bad guy. Like, he's definitely on Team Fire Nation. But he's still such a likable character. Like, him soaking and you say in underwear. I don't think he was in underwear when Zuko first showed up.
Oh yeah, definitely not at first. Otherwise, why would they hide him with the hand?
Right. And I think like I have several notes in here about Uncle or Iroh and like his attire or lack thereof throughout this episode, because like the entirety of this episode, he is not fully clothed like we've seen him in the rest of the series.
You have to imagine that when he went into that hot springs, that his clothes were nearby. So the Earth Kingdom soldiers or benders or whoever decided at that point, we're going to take you back naked.
Well, so, and that's like the visual you get when he's chained up, right? But it looks like that maybe he has underwear on, because at some point he has underwear. But like that was the thing. Like I said, one of my notes is, why didn't they put Iroh in his clothes? And immediately after that, but they put his shoes on him.
Yeah, it was just a very strange decision, and I feel like somewhere along the line, there had to have been an animator or a storyteller who was like, no, wait a minute, hear me out.
Well, or it's like, oh, from the very beginning, they're like, let's just have him be naked for some reason. But then like, oh, he's trying to leave a trail for his nephew. So like, let's just put his shoes on again. But like, that to me, this is another one of those things that mean nothing to anyone else, but for me it's like, what is going on with this choice? Right. Because yes, it was the animators or the storytellers that made the choice to put the flip-flops on him, but in turn that means the earthbenders made that choice. Yep. And why?
We're gonna make sure you have your underpants and your shoes, but don't worry about the rest of it.
And the underpants is a question mark, because I don't know how accurate that is in that moment. Like, because they are very much having him tied up and chained up in ways that make it look like he's not wearing any underwear.
It could be. The just so you know, that scene with him and Zuko at the end where they're back to back and he's standing with the chains broken and his belly out, that has become like one of the top memes in like the Avatar subreddit.
Rightfully so. I mean, if again, he is ultimately, I think, a bad guy. I think my hopes for Uncle and Zuko becoming like good guys and part of the gang, or like maybe like not part of the gang, but like loose affiliates, the enemy of my enemy is my friend, kind of deal. I think I've given up on that. I think these two parts have really solidified the fact that like they are Team Fire Nation for the most part. But Iroh is such a likable character. It is. He has, even when he's like being bad, right? Like, he's hard to hate. He really is. And another episode, or another part of this episode where, like what you're talking about, like just before they're fighting back to back, Zuko has the decision to chase after the gang, or what he assumes is the gang. He just sees the sky bison,
right?
Or save his uncle, and he chooses his uncle, which I think is fantastic. Like, I think that's it's that character building for Zuko that at times will make him likable. He's not as likable as his uncle, but
Yeah,
he's
he's
definitely
brash and
likable.
arrogant and stuff like that.
Mhm.
And I think you're right. Like to some point, you've got a choice there that would make the audience determine whether or not you're a good guy or a bad guy. If you were a bad guy, like straight up, you're going to say, you know, let Uncle face whatever consequences he has to on his own. I'm going to go after, the Avatar.
Right.
And he continues to make choices as the series goes on, as we'll talk about in episode 2 of today's pod. But he does make choices that endanger his group and things like that. But in this case, at least, he turns around and he says, Uncle's important to me. We're going to go and make sure he's okay.
Yeah, and I think that's something that we've seen him done in the past before as well. So again, it's those little things that make you question about like what is his what will his end goal or end game be
Yeah, what's the
really,
arc gonna look like?
right? But I think realistically, like we kind of I think we know now. Like I think we know at least for this season, maybe at the very least. But anyway, I'm so glad that they were like prominent figures in this 2-part episode, because it's been a while, and not that you forget like how much you like these characters, but you forget how much you like these characters, especially Iroh. Like, I think I said it earlier. Like, he really like was standout in this episode. He shone in this episode.
Yep. There. Obviously, we still have more to talk about when it comes to those, but it was a good sign of things that despite the things happening with the spirit world, the first time that we're actually seeing the spirit world, that those two characters were able to shine and kind of steal the show as good as they did, because it is an integral part of the Avatar universe to see, all right, we've got the 4 elements, but we also have this underlying other world that's being affected by certain things that are happening in the world.
Right.
The Heibai monster that's terrifying this town is an important part to seeing these other things that are going on.
Yeah, and it was interesting when again, the interactions between Aang and this spirit monster was like really fun at first, because it was like just Aang being a kid and not knowing how to deal with the situation, and the people of this village saying, he's the Avatar, he's got it, and not letting his friends go help, which, as it was proved, was the right decision to, maybe not put the other kids out there in danger, because Sokka does get taken from the area, and ultimately just, I guess, goes to the spirit world, as we discover. Like, him and the other villagers that went missing get taken by this monster into the spirit world. And what I really like, and it goes back to the beginning of this episode, and really kind of shows that Aang had the answer all along, is that this monster literally feels the way Aang did when he saw the scarred land. He is just very, very, or it is very, very sad that nature has been destroyed.
Yeah.
And we ultimately find out that it's a panda ghost.
Now, let me ask you this. When you were seeing the Heibai, run around and everything, were you thinking panda?
Not until I saw the panda. I was like, that checks out. That checks out because of the color scheme.
We watched it, way back when we first watched it, and then we watched it again yesterday. And we, I think, said the same exact thing that we said before. It does not give panda, it gives orca.
Oh yeah, for sure. You know what? If you were to throw that out to me, I think in monster form, it definitely has more of an orca feel, and I think that's because of the shape, right? Like it's angular, it's pointy, and long, and not fat like a panda.
Yeah, the mouth is drawn back. Like when you think of like a bear, I don't think that you think too much of like the muzzle shape. It almost looks like more like feline than canine.
Yeah, to me, like I guess if you really wanted to invoke bear from that spirit monster version of this panda ghost, you'd probably want to have it rounder, or at least less like angular, for sure. I think if you have more roundness to it, you get that panda shape, or that panda or bear, hint towards what it really is. And that's probably very much by design, by the animators to throw you off, to make it look scary, and probably even for this panda ghost, who is just a sad panda because his nature has been destroyed, and he wants to be scary. So why would you? Because again, I think that rounder look, even if you're a big scary monster, is going to be less scary than what we got with the angular beast.
Yeah, I will say this. I think Orca would have been tough to switch it to, because at that point you're on dry land. How are you going to pull that off? And the panda is a symbol of species conservation. So when it comes to like the World Wildlife Fund and everything, like that's their symbol. So it does kind of make sense that, like, if that's the notion of what this episode is focusing on, for that to be the creature that you end up with.
Yes. Yeah, I agree. And one could argue that this episode was part filler, right? Because it is another side quest that the gang is on, really. But ultimately, it doesn't feel like filler, because I think partially Zuko and Iroh are back. Also, we get the dragon, who in the spirit world, who is Roku's, sorry, spirit animal or whatever. And we learn that, Aang's got to go on a little field trip to the Fire Nation, and to speak to his past life in the spirit world, to maybe get some answers about what the hell's going on, and how he can move forward in a timely fashion to become an avatar, because he was missing for 100 years.
Yeah, it was nice connective tissue to have what would have felt like a filler episode, especially if you didn't have Zuko and Iroh, to be able to say, like, all right, that not only is this not filler because we're going to link it with this piece of your past, but we're also going to kind of integrate it into, as we talk, a little bit more about the second episode now. It really sets a timeline. Up until this point, it was kind of like, hey, you do you, and take as much time as you need to do X, Y, and Z. But at this point, we know by the end of the summer, at the summer solstice, you need to be able to fight the Fire Lord.
Well, and that's something we find out in part 2. In the end of part one is that, let's go on the Fire Nation road trip.
Right.
Which I do. So do you, unless you have anything else to say about part 1, I'll give my grade to it, which I just logged these in my app at a 4.5 out of 5 for this first episode. Again, it could have been a filler episode, but it wasn't. It was a tiny bit filler that gave you some character development and also moved the plot forward. Definitely a top tier episode. Probably one of the best episodes we've had in the last few weeks. And I'm very happy with it. Do you have anything else about episode 1 here?
I do. Did you notice, and I'm sure you did, that while everybody else doesn't notice it, Iroh notices the spirit of the dragon?
I didn't.
So while they're bringing him on the Kokobos, he actually is like looking to the sky as Aang and the dragon.
Oh, yes. You know what? I did notice that. I did. Mike, I watched too much Avatar today. I did notice. You're absolutely right. He did look to the sky. I even rewound that. I didn't put the notes in. I don't know why I didn't put that note in. But I rewound that part because I was like, he noticed something.
Yep. And that is peculiar because certainly nobody else did.
Right. And I wonder why. I wonder if that gets answered. You probably know. I don't know though. Before we move on to part 2, Winter Solstice, Avatar, Roku, do you want to share any trivia for part 1 now, or do you have that kind of all wrapped up into one?
Oh, I wove it into our conversation.
Perfect.
So
Perfect. All right. In that case, we are going to take a very quick break for some sort of mid-roll commercial. And we'll be back on the other end with part 2, Avatar Roku, right here on avatarstateradio.com.
Let me tell you something you already know.
Here's the pitch on the way, a swing and a belt, left field, way back, Blue Jays win it! The Blue Jays are World Series champions!
The world ain't all sunshine and rainbows.
Final seconds tick away. Jim Plunkett leads the Oakland Raiders to Super Bowl 15 victory, and Plunkett is announced as the most valuable player. The final score, Oakland 27, Philadelphia 10.
It's a very mean and nasty place, and I don't care how tough you are, it will beat you to your knees and keep you there permanently if you let it.
Those left here at the Joe applauding the Red Wings, who are going to win this game 6-1.
You, me, or nobody is going to hit as hard as life.
Coming up on 10 seconds remaining, and the Los Angeles Lakers will make it a second straight NBA crown.
But it ain't about how hard you hit.
Swing and a drive, left field, it's deep, it's yes, and it is yes, yes. It is bedlam at the bank as Bryce Harper has put the Phillies on top.
It's about how hard you can get hit and keep moving forward. How much you can take and keep moving forward.
The Philadelphia Phillies losing a game to the Mets in the 2024 NLDS, and me texting JJ saying, yo, this is the podcast we should start if they lose. And guess what? They lost. And then it kind of turned into like a real thing that I'm really happy about, because I think it's pretty obvious, despite like our different levels of interest in all the various sports in Philadelphia, we all love Philly sports.
That's how winning is done.
This is the city of heartbreak. If we're the city of brotherly love, there's a lot of love that gets broken in this town perpetually.
Now, if you know what you're worth, now go out and get what you're worth. But you got to be willing to take the hits and not pointing fingers saying you ain't where you want to be because of him or her or anybody. Cowards do that, and that ain't you.
Philly.
You're better than that.
Philly, what up? We define sports passion.
I will be forced to say the name of the show yet again. We'll get him next year.
AI skipped practice, Randall didn't read. Barkley claimed he wasn't a role model for the seeds. While most cities would have been less than pleased, these were all heroes, they satisfied a need. You try living in the shadow of the world's greatest city. See if you don't get a little snippy. Chip on a shoulder, brick or a boulder. This ain't obsession, this is a culture.
And we're back.
Oh my God, it was like we never left.
You know what? For us, it was. For everyone else out there, welcome to timey-wimey stuff.
It was the quickest advertisements that have ever run.
Hey, or the longest. We don't know. We don't know. No, I promise that they were short. And if not, I guess you turned us off and you're missing all the goodness in part 2. We gave you 8 minutes of sky bison science in part 1. What are you going to miss out in part 2? You got to be listening to find out right here on avatarstateradio.com. For those that need the reminder, I don't know why you would in the middle of a podcast, but I'm Kevin Gallagher. And I am the host of this show that knows nothing about Avatar except for the episodes that we're watching in order right now. And I am joined by my co-host, Mike.
Hello. I watched most of these things. I watched all the shows. I watched the movie. I watched the new show. It's good.
It's good. It's good. So in this part, it picks up right away, because as we kind of discovered at the end of the previous episode, this field trip that they're on to the Fire Nation, to the Crescent Island where the Roku temple is like, oh, you got to get there by sundown, like in 24 hours. You got 24 hours to get there, and that's when the solstice, or that's when the sun hits a certain point at a certain time of day, at a certain point of year, and is going to light up your past self so that you can talk to them.
You know, if they didn't see the scar in the first episode and didn't crash land and didn't get to see the spirit and didn't get to see, the dragon spirit to get the warning about, hey, the solstice is going to come to an end, none of this would have been possible.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, and very much so, the beginning of the previous episode, there's also like, he's talking about how, like, I really need to find a way to talk to Roku. Like, And I don't know why he's hung up on Roku. Is it because it's just the previous one? Who knows? Is it because he's a Fire Nation guy? Who knows?
Well, I think it was. I mean, he definitely got the notion from Gyatso that Roku was going to be the person you were going to talk to.
Yeah,
and true. I think there might be a little bit of as well that you got to figure like it is the Fire Nation, so who better to to teach you about your enemies than people who have walked among them.
Right. Very true. So this episode opens up with a chase, right? Like, so the gang is on the way to the Crescent Island, and we see Zuko and Iroh chasing on their little boat, and the chase is on, and then suddenly our old friend, let's see if I nail this name, Zhao.
Yeah, buddy.
Yeah. He shows up, and all of a sudden, my literal next note here is, who do I root for here? like now there's three parties in this chase right now. There's the gang, and there's Team Zuko, and then there's Team Zhao. And like clearly two of them are bad or part of the Fire Nation, but one of them is worse than the others. So it was a neat little scene of the chase. Throwing so Zuko was throwing stinky fireballs. Is that correct?
Stinky fireballs. I don't recall what you're talking about.
Weren't they attacking the gang from his boat too, or no?
Oh, I don't recall. So at one point yesterday, I was on my phone for like way too long, and I realized like, wait a minute, I'm supposed to be paying attention to this. So maybe stinky fireballs had something to do right now with where we were at. And I
swear that is what I heard and read on closed captioning. But it was only when Zuko was like catapulting stuff towards the gang. When the worst Fire Nation guys started throwing fireballs, there was nothing about them being stinky, but there were so many boats and so many catapults. They were coming fast, high, low, hot, hotter. And all of a sudden, our boy that we just spent 8 minutes on in the previous part of this episode, he's no longer a slow boy. No, Appa, he's a fast boy.
Yeah, where did he get all that agility? And furthermore, why, if he couldn't rise above the clouds, did he not do that in the first place to disappear from the enemies?
Which actually I feel like put them at a disadvantage as well, right? Because when they were below the clouds, yes, the enemy can see you and can fire, but you can also see where the fireballs are coming from ahead of time. Versus once they went above the clouds, which why were they dry? Because we established in the previous episodes, clouds are wet.
That's right.
Anyway, now the fireballs are coming up like almost at the last minute, but not, again, our boy Appa all of a sudden is the most agile, fast sky bison in the world.
One of the other things too is, I guess the reason that you wouldn't have done that beforehand and hide in the clouds is you're looking for something beneath the clouds. You're not exactly going to have a lot of luck finding it if you're obscuring your vision.
True. Very true. Very true. And they are also all kids, right? Like let's not forget that these are 12 to 15 or 16-year-olds. Maybe Sokka, who's the oldest, maybe he's like the most mature one to be like, maybe we should go up. But like, they're all kids. They don't know what they're like. How many times have they literally said, I don't know what I'm doing?
I have no clue what's going on right now.
Right. So, but yeah, to your point, yeah, they can't see where they're going. And that's, again, kind of goes with the fact that like, do you want to, and obviously at some point they chose the fact to go above the clouds because they thought it was the better move. And ultimately it all worked out, right? Except for that moment where Sokka falls off Appa. And there's a little bit of a thrilling like chase there because again, our big fluffy boy, is an agile fluffy boy.
Yeah, which begs the question, like, why is he slow most times, and how does he speed up? Which again kind of goes into your question about like how does he manipulate his movement?
Right.
Maybe it plays out later. One other thing, Sokka falling was definitely important, but we also had some burn scars and everything on Appa as well.
Yeah. So that was my poor big fluffy boy had some burn scars. But everyone, including Momo, was putting them out. Well, not Aang. Aang was busy trying to make sure they didn't crash. Which is also curious is that obviously, I feel like Appa's pretty intelligent. So what is just let the beast do his thing. He'll get you out of that bind.
Just let him cook.
Yeah. And we do see, so, well, before I get to this, we when Sokka's falling and they catch him right in the ocean and gets slapped in the face with that fish. Oh, don't think I didn't see this. I didn't miss this. Momo caught that fish and saved it for later.
Absolutely. That little dude is hungry all the time.
I think, and I love Appa. I really do. But Momo is really growing on me as he's contending for that top spot of animal companion.
Well, yeah, because eventually we know Aang's going to need an earthbender, and we've got the earthbender right there with him.
I was like, wait, is he going to be some sort of earthbending animal companion? Oh, no. It's a throwback to all the jokes. And then we also get kind of near the end of this chase / showdown. The final stand from Zhao, throwing a final fireball at them, and Aang being a complete badass without going into Avatar state, jumping, using his air bending, breaking that fireball, first of all, putting the fireball out, then breaking the big rock or whatever it was into tiny little pieces. And then suddenly, I guess, forgetting to use his avatar power or his airbending powers to calmly put himself back on Appa and just crashing into his neck or Appa's neck and his friends catching him.
Right. He goes from super skilled at times to being so aloof and yeah. But I mean, I guess it makes sense. He's 12.
Right. But that was and this all happens in I think we just spent about 10 to 12 minutes talking about this opening scene, which is quite literally maybe 3 minutes.
Goes to show you how much we can spin our wheels.
But yeah, but it's just, there's so much going on in that 3 minutes. Especially trying to think about the science of Appa. I think that's an important discussion.
We also talked for a decent amount of time in the last part of this episode about whether or not Haibai was a panda at heart or an orca.
Right. Well, definitely a panda at heart. We know that. Should he have been an orca? Who's to say? If there was water nearby, maybe. I do like that. Now, and this kind of, I think, goes back to answer your question about Appa's agility and going fast and why we don't see that more often. Our dude was sleep flying. I don't know how safe that is, but he was snoring. There were literal snores I heard.
I mean, I sleep fly, so I get it.
But it's intriguing because, again, it goes back to the science of this sky bison being able to fly. I don't think birds sleep fly. I think they eventually do have to land and rest. And I mean, to Appa's credit, he does get to rest when they land on the Crescent Island. He literally is done. He's cooked. He's let me lay down and sleep. I think Katara's giving him a little pet and talking to him while Sokka is well rested, ready to fight the Fire Nation, talking to Momo, and
not really talking to Momo,
but it's, so I think that goes to answer I guess maybe the Sky Bison, or at least Appa, has the ability through whatever science that defines his logic, is able to go fast and be super agile when needed, but then it takes it out of him because, again, our dude was sleep flying and then he was cooked and he was ready to take a nap on that, which is a bad place to take a nap because presumably people are following you. You know, at least somebody knows how to get to you.
Yeah.
So it was wild that like they didn't even hide him. They didn't even put like.
Oh yeah,
trees or
yeah. They
something
just
on
let him sleep there, and then the bad guys did show up. Like, what happened when they did? Like, we don't really know what happened with Appa at that point.
Well,
But I will mention this.
Yes.
I'm going to pose a possibility for you. Is it possible that he's not manipulating air, but he knows the Force? Because he did the same thing that Princess Leia did when she was asleep in space.
Well, did Dave Filoni direct this episode?
He did not, but Giancarlo Volpe did, and he worked on a lot of the Clone Wars. So
then maybe I would love. I mean, and I think we've said this before. Like, I do feel like that in Avatar there is a lot, and it makes sense because Dave Filoni directed the first episode, and I know he's not the creator of the show. But when you're like the first director of the show, and maybe it's different in animation, but when you're the first director of a show, like you are establishing a lot of guidelines, like that show Reaper that was on the CW for a little while. It wasn't a Kevin Smith show, but they sure as hell advertised it as a Kevin Smith show. And he defined what that show was in episode 1, and let other directors kind of take it from there. So I do wonder if maybe some Star Wars influence came in through Dave Filoni's direction in that first episode, because we've talked about how like this show does, like, you can relate a lot of the magical properties of this show to like Star Wars and the Force.
Yeah, it's very true. So I don't know how much he did from the aspect of like adding story to it itself, but at the very least, we know that he directed 8 episodes. He storyboarded each of those episodes as well. So he was a storyboard artist for the episodes that he directed, which is, a pretty big piece to play, because I would assume that the storyboards were then brought to the animators, so they knew, right, ultimately what he was, what they were going to be working with. So I don't know if he wasn't as involved as he was, how would Avatar have changed?
Right. Yeah. No, I mean, I think you're absolutely right. I think, again, the showrunners are, in a movie, it's the director, right? The director and, to a small degree, the writer is pushing that vision to life. In the TV world, it's very different, where it's the showrunner who and the writers who are bringing that vision to life, and the director's there to kind of just make sure everything stays on the rails, maybe bring some of their own essence into the show and whatnot. But it's really a showrunner, and I would imagine it's similar in animation, where it's the showrunner, the writers, and probably the animation team. Depending on like what the direction is in the notes, be like, I've read that some shows will be like, here's what's happening, animate as you like. And so like that animator has like a lot of creative freedom to like make a scene be something that maybe wasn't the original intent, but because they had free reign, because it's like, oh, we're just having a big 5-minute battle, let's have fun. So it is I would be very curious to see how much of this show was influenced by Dave Filoni, and in turn George Lucas.
Yeah, possibly. That is a good point. I took us off the rails. I apologize.
That's what we do here. If it's not Appa and flying science, or Momo and catching fish, it's why does this show remind us of Star Wars?
Mm-hmm. So we're on Crescent Island, yes, and we get into the temple.
Yeah, and rightfully so. They're very, very cautious, but do realize that there's at first no one there, and then the fire sages, they're called, or something like that. Temple sages.
Correct, sir.
Yeah, so the sages are there, and they're. What I find fascinating is how, I mean, I guess maybe 100 years is not a quick time, but I do feel like it is in the grand scheme of things. How quick the sages and their like descendants were to turn on the Avatar, because as we know, like this war has been happening for roughly 100 years, like maybe a little under 100 years, because it doesn't seem like Aang, when he first in episode 1, knew that there was a war going on. So the war happened right around when Aang went on ice. So for about 100 years, there have been descendants of these sages whose jobs were to protect the temple and await the new avatar and like be welcoming to the new avatar.
Yeah, to guide him, basically.
Yeah, despite the fact that they knew, oh, there's a war coming, but our loyalty is to the avatar, not to the Fire Nation. And I feel like 100 years is, and obviously less than 100 years, because it's not like it was just today that they all changed their mind and supported the Fire Nation in the war.
Yeah.
Like at some point in under 100 years, they were like, well, screw it, we're Team Fire Nation now.
Yeah, I mean, you figure propaganda, when it's there for a while, does kind of work its way into like the zeitgeist of the people. It very much is a situation where if you keep hearing the same, look at all the people. I don't want to be super political, so look at all those people who watch that show. that it completely just rots your brain at that point. And I mean, like, I think, what is it, yellow journalism, where you're trying to turn your people against other people. I think that was what it was called. And it, like, the whole concept could be at play here, where it's you're trying to change hearts and minds, and when all you have is the one voice whispering in your ear that, hey, the avatar is going to take away the freedoms that we've earned for you and things like that. It kind of turns the notion of the avatar always being a good guy on its head.
Yeah, it turns your perception that way. But what I really like in this scene here is that eventually we do find a fire sage who is a friend, like never has turned his back on the thought of the avatar coming back, has presumably just kind of been pretending to be pro Fire Nation, just to survive and make sure he was there for the avatar's return. And I forget the boy's name, and I say boy, he's the oldest one in this group now, but
Shyu or Shyu,
something like that. But he's like, oh yeah, he's like a friend of to the gang and wants to help them. Like he knows, like, oh, you're meant to go speak to Roku and you have to do it like in the next few minutes. And he helps them, like, kind of like after a little bit of chasing in the temple, he helps him through like the backwater ways, which I liked how, like, it was very mimicking how doors worked in the Earth Kingdom that we visited a few episodes ago, where
we saw something similar in the air temple as well, right? Didn't he have to like blow some air in the air temple as well?
I don't see that. I was so concentrated on how dark that episode really was, that I don't think I noticed that, or if I did, I don't remember. But yeah, it's cool. And hey, you know what? Probably, and if not, we'll probably see it soon. And more than likely, we'll see something in the water world that way as well. I think it's really neat that these people that have these bending abilities like came up with ways to like use it for everyday life, so that it's not just like a superpower, like, oh, this is who we are, like this is, I can move air or I can have fire from my fingertips, and we're going to use that as a tool to open doors or to do whatever.
Yeah, I mean, and not even that, but like everything that we saw in the Earth Kingdom, like the completely different way. I don't know. I'm certainly a world builder when it comes to like the Telest universe and everything that I work on, but I don't know that I would think to the minute details about like, well, they're earthbenders, so they wouldn't need seams in their walls or anything. Like, right. It's just solid. There's nothing there, and you wouldn't need anything. Like they did, the people who are working on the storyline for this show, it strikes you even years later, having watched it, like how integrated they are into this world.
Yeah. No, I agree. This show, I think, does a lot of world building. I think the only time it fails in that is when it has those filler episodes. It's almost like they fit the world building in a really good way in all these important episodes. And then when it comes to these filler episodes, like they kind of like they sometimes are just legitimately filler episodes. It's weird how that works. But yeah, no, I agree with the world building. I think that overall, like Avatar, at least so far, 8 episodes into a 22, 23 episode season, whatever it might be, has done a great job at like really establishing the rules of this world.
Yeah, and we kind of hinted at it in the first part of the episode, but they do it even more in this episode by saying, "Hey, you've got a timeline now."
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So like, you know, they get to the room where Roku is. God damn. Roku is the statue of him, and like our fire friend, all of a sudden is like, because I guess they sealed the door. I guess normally they just keep the doors wide open, right? Like, who cares? Like, anyone can come see the statue of Roku. But now that we know the airbender is either on his way or here, like, let's close those doors up. Which has like a nice little fun scene where, you know, Sokka kind of has a great idea. It just didn't pan out with like making fake fire bending with the what was in the little animal skin stuff.
You know, I wish I knew, but I can't remember.
Yeah.
But some kind of explosives.
Right. And
maybe it was the coal or something. I don't know.
I forget, but like it worked. I mean, it works in the sense that it makes it look like the door was open, right? And this is where, you know, we briefly touched on, you know, Appa and like what happened when everyone showed up. To kind of, my theory on that is like in this scene, we see that Momo is small enough to fit through and get to the other side and act as a shadow, making the other fire sages think that Aang made it in and is about to talk to Roku. And then we see when they all open the door, which is the real trick that Katara came up with, that Momo is standing there. He leaves as Aang like matrix his way in with like a jump and a kick after being caught by Zuko.
Right. Zuko shows up, manages to restrain him briefly, and it's only by the skin of his teeth and by like pure desperation that he gets out, knocks Zuko down, and like speeds his way. And friends be damned at this point.
Well, and to be fair, Katara and maybe Sokka, but definitely Katara said, "Don't like go." Like,
yeah, I think Shyu tells him the same. Like, get in there, basically.
Yeah, and I think this is where my theory is that Momo, I think at this point, like, because he like jumped on, like, part of the commotion is like he jumped and leapt on someone's face and stuff, and I think he gets away, and I guess Momo and Appa can talk. I'm just going to assume that they have like some sort of bond that's unbreakable. And I think Momo is like, yo, Appa, you got to wake up. There's bad guys here. We got to be ready to swoop in and make the save. Well, no, just look for blue. Just look for the blue and you know when it's time to go.
There you go.
That's my theory on how Appa didn't get, picked off by the Fire Nation. But yeah, Aang ultimately makes it in, and very impatiently waits to talk to Roku, which is where we, touching on what you mentioned a few minutes ago, and also at the end of our first part of this episode, where in the conversation with Roku, we learn about like the start of the war and how there was a comet that made the Fire Nation stronger, and it's what really started the war. And it sounds like in like literal months, I guess weeks, maybe, there's another comet that's going to come back that will supposedly make them even stronger, and it will really be what gives the Fire Nation the edge, not only to win the war, but to like defend themselves against a fully trained Avatar in Aang, who now essentially needs the Cliff Notes version of becoming an Avatar.
Right. I think it plays out to about a year, because he's at the summer solstice now, or I'm sorry, he's at the winter solstice, and they're giving him until the summer solstice. I think in our world it doesn't quite work that way because it's like half the year away.
Right.
But I think in the premise of the show, it's a year. But yeah, like he's supposed to have years and years to train, and Roku's just like, well, sucks to suck, I guess.
Well, and like he does say that. Kind of, but he also says like, I know you can do it because you did it before. I don't know what that means. Like, to me that means like, oh, like, so at some point in the history of this world there was like another coup with a nation trying to take over and another young Avatar who had to quickly learn. Whether it was Roku, probably not, right? Like, I would be hard pressed to think that 2 Avatars in a row had to deal with a war. Maybe, who knows? But since they all like, it's one life that they're all sharing and being rebirthed into, like some past life of Aang's has learned to do and become an Avatar, you know, in a short span of time, at least enough to save the world.
Yeah, I feel like it might not necessarily have been. I don't remember the exact dialogue, so I don't remember if Roku was saying that like you did it again, as in someone else had the exact same circumstances. But I could understand and imagine a situation where an Avatar had to learn faster than normal because of some kind of, you know, devastating consequence if they didn't.
Right.
So yeah, at this point we do realize that, you know, when the comet comes back, you know, that Fire Lord Sozin kind of named after himself, all hell's going to break loose again. Not necessarily for Aang himself, because in theory all you have to do is, you know, navigate yourself away from any trouble. But the problem is, if Fire Lord Ozai has the power of the comet on his hands, he can really knock down like any of the people who've been, you know, putting up a fight.
Right. Including, it sounds like, the Avatar. Like it would be hard for the Avatar to defeat what's to come if it comes to pass. Is the vibe I got, at least.
Right. I mean, you could theorize Aang has already one time avoided the comet by freezing himself. So if he wanted to, all he'd really need to do is hide. But when he came back, what kind of world would be left to save?
Right. And I think that like the lessons, like Aang is in the beginning of the first part of these 2 episodes, like he is already beating himself up for being gone for 100 years because nature's been destroyed and that scar of land. So I think now Aang's at a point where like he does understand that there's like repercussions of like what he does and doesn't do. But at the same time, I think he's willing to lay his life on the line when it comes to saving the world at this point. Like he understands that like he has a responsibility.
Right. I mean, there's no hesitation once Roku says like, hey, you know, I can make sure that, you know, because we're one, I can lend you my power if you're ready. And Aang doesn't question it at all. He's just like, yeah, I'm ready.
And like, you know, we've said like in the last several episodes, I'm so glad that they haven't really like used the Avatar state as like a, you know, get out of jail free card, because I feel like it's been a very like episode 2 maybe is like the last time we saw Avatar state. Maybe no, that's not true. The Air Temple episode, I think we saw it as well. But regardless, it's been a while since we've seen it. So like to see Aang go Avatar state is like, okay, now I'm ready for it. It's been forever. Let's see him get into his Avatar state. And then for the reveal to be that it's that like Roku kind of takes over the
right. And not only like takes over his body, but like becomes like an effigy of himself through Aang's body, because everybody else sees who it is and like questions like Avatar Roku. Like, it changes fundamentally, at least briefly, what Aang appears to be.
And I'm very curious at like that, because that's clearly like a power of some sort, being able to like, oh, yes, we're all the same because I died and I was rebirthed into you, or whatever the scenario is that rule scheme works out to. But like to physically be able to like bring your body back, or at least to make it appear that your body is back, along with all the power that, because he was doing fire bending, right? Whether that's, Roku or Aang or both or every avatar that's ever existed, he's doing firebending right there to basically destroy the temple and save the gang. And he doesn't know. I don't think he knows he's saving the gang, and maybe he does, because it is Aang. Aang is in there, so maybe he knows he's saving the gang. But it is, what an awesome power set to be able to invoke every now and then. And I'd be very curious, like, do we see that again? Is it similar to where like, oh, you have to be in the spirit world to really, and not in the spirit world, but you have to be like communing with the spirit world in order to make this happen? Because we've now been told by Roku himself that like, hey, when you need me, I'll be there because I am you. Meaning that like Roku doesn't have to come back to the temple. No, I'm sorry. Aang doesn't have to come back to the temple to talk to Roku, or go to a spirit world necessarily. Like he can kind of just like zone out or whatever. He can commune with himself.
Yeah, it does kind of beg the question of like, does he have the power to go avatar state all the time? Or is it something, it kind of, like you said, it's an interesting power set, but it's also very overpowering. So what's to stop him from doing it all the time? And it'll be interesting to see how that plays out in a way that makes the rest of the series enjoyable, and have the audience still worry, how is the gang going to get out of this mess without every time invoking, the avatar state?
Well, I think very much the avatar state, I would argue right now, is still like he doesn't have control over it. And I think that there's like a power greater than that avatar state, and that's like Roku or any other previous avatar embodying Aang, right? And like using their power, which, because they're an experienced avatar, is likely stronger than Aang, even when Aang goes into an avatar state, because he's kind of doing it like it's a muscle reflex to protect people or to protect himself. So like, I feel like there's avatar state, and then like, let's be on brand with, well, this is Nickelodeon, not Disney, but like avatar state plus, right? Like there's that secondary level that we witnessed today when Roku was there instead of Aang. So I'll be curious to see how that comes into play.
Yeah. And it's a nice way to also move back, because at this point we've seen 2 other avatars. So it's a neat way to see the history of what the avatar is and what's come before Aang, because you figure it's important for us to know, where the history of the avatar came and how it, connects to the rest of the avatar universe that we're living in now.
I agree. My final notes are just a little bit more like fun-ish notes. Is Momo and Appa to the rescue, where we see Momo has a brand new hat, and I pray to God, swear to God, Mike, he better have that hat in the next episode, because this is continuity now. Like, my Momo needs a Fire Nation hat going forward.
That's so funny.
And my final note is that like family shot of like Appa and Katara, Appa flying off into the moonlight, Aang kind of like, I don't know if he's sad, I don't know if he's like exhausted, I don't know what he is, right, really, because you just see his silhouette, but you see Katara and Sokka and Momo, who I think you see his ears, so my guess is we don't see the hat again, but you see him fly from one side to the other side of Aang, so that they're like all kind of embracing and comforting Aang in this moment of, solace, I guess.
I mean, at this point, we know that he doesn't have that free time anymore. He's got a year to train, and the Rocky music is starting for him.
yeah. I mean, it is quite literally the eye of the tiger for him now. But yeah, so this episode, like my final overall note on this episode, great. Like, what a great two-parter. I'm glad we did it all as one episode, because it would have been killing me to wait to do the second part, and
right.
B, just to be able to like experience this story as, I don't know if this aired originally as one like 45-minute episode, or if it was 2 episodes back to back in a week or whatever, but to watch it as essentially one episode really like reminded me, not that I was down on this show at all, but really reminded me like, okay, this show is good. When it's good, it's good.
Right. And this is the second two-parter that we've seen in the series. It's higher rated than the last episode that we watched. But it is not. I think the next two-parters in this season are both rated higher. So it is going to be interesting to see as we get to those other pieces. We do have a couple of episodes between the one true filler is coming up. It's the lowest rated episode of the series is coming up within the next 3 episodes.
Watch it be the one I love. Watch it be the one I love.
I don't think it will, but we'll see.
But yeah, that's again, this show continues to impress me. I continue to love it, and it is wild that I like kind of ignored it for as long as I did, because to me, you know, it's from the outside, it's very much it looks like an anime, but once you're in it to win it, like it's inspired for sure. But and nothing against, I know I'm saying this like I'm down on anime. It's just not my thing. I'm not big on anime. So for me, like to come into it and like feel like it's just a fully fleshed story that like, yes, it's for kids, but it's also for adults. It's emotional. And hey, I appreciate like the nods that they have to anime in this series. I really do appreciate. And maybe it will mean I'll give anime a shot one day, but I'm so happy that like we did this podcast to get me to watch this show, because it is such a wonderful show. And again, this two-parter really like just reminds you that like when this show is good, it's great.
I'm very happy to hear you say that, because it would have been very different if you would have been like episode 8 and you're like, I'm just not getting it, Mike. Why did you do this to me?
Why am I locked in for 3 seasons in a movie? All right. Did you weave your trivia into this one as well, or do you have anything to kind of wrap us up on?
The only trivia that like I was able to find was pretty much just that Roku, this was his first appearance. I mean, we've seen his statues like in like the swirl before, but this is the first time that like he ever gets like a speaking role or anything like that. So not too much else is going on.
Yeah. So again, folks, I know for a fact there are other Avatar podcasts out there that are actively producing episodes, whether it's about the animated show or the live action show. I really don't know. I think there's one other one out there. So I appreciate you guys tuning into us first and foremost. And I gotta remind you that there's no other podcast. I'll be damned if another one of these podcasts are out here diving into the science of sky bison. Okay. So you're not getting that anywhere else. Mike, where can they find you?
So you can find me at tellus.com. You can find me on my premium sites at patreon.com/tellus and tellus.etsy.com. And if you want to see me live doing my stuff, you can see me on twitch.tv/thattellusguy.
And I'm Kevin Gallagher. You can find me now at that. Nope. Well, yes, at that nerdy Kev. 100%. You can find me there on most social medias. But I'm changing my plugs up because I now have a website, thatnerdykev.com. Probably going to be creating a self-service like Linktree type page on that. But for now, thatnerdykev.com will get you to everything I'm doing, all my social media stuff. I host another podcast called Everything is Awesome. You can find that on awesomepodcast.com. And of course, this show you can find only on avatarstateradio.com. Thank you all for listening. Let's get into our Avatar State now. This has been Avatar State Radio. Signing off.